Nature American Spring Live on KRWG Public Media April 29th, 30th, and May 1st at 7 p.m. More at pbs.org/American Spring Live. Major support for Nature American Spring Live and this related local programming was provided by the National Science Foundation and the Anne Ray Foundation. Thanks for joining us for Issues and Answers, Protecting Our Environment. To encourage conservation, some say you need to start young, and later in the program, we'll head outside with a local nonprofit that provides opportunities to Latino youth, giving them a chance to explore the natural wonders of the borderland. And those natural wonders are threatened. We'll learn more about climate change. Plus, we'll talk with a renowned climate expert from Columbia University. But first, one of the most pressing issues here and around the world, reducing our use of fossil fuels. It's not just about climate change, it's also about protecting our public lands. For this story, we visit the Otero Mesa, an area that could be threatened with more oil and gas drilling. The Otero Mesa. At over 1.2 million acres, it's a vast treasure southeast of Alamogordo and west of Carlsbad. Most of it is public land, and about 500,000 acres are desert grassland, a rare and disappearing habitat for some 1,000 native species. Kevin Bixby has been working to save this place for more than a decade. A court win against the administration of George W. Bush protected it from increased oil and gas drilling. But there are fears it could be at risk again.
So our concern is that if Otero Mesa is opened up for full-scale oil and gas development, that there will be hundreds, if not thousands, of these well pads out here, each one scraping off 5 acres of vegetation, piling up the topsoil, building a road to access it, pipelines to access it as well, most likely, or else lots of trucks coming and going.
Trucks and development don't sound like a good idea to Alex Hebert. He likes the peace of this place and its access to natural wonders hard to find anywhere else. Hebert studies plants at New Mexico State University.
Well, this is a hotspot for diversity, especially with grasses, and it's unusual in that it's not very disturbed. It's hard to find a place like that in the United States where there's undisturbed, pristine land, and this is a great spot for it, particularly with grasses. And it's just a great place to explore species diversity.
This is so important. Grasslands throughout North America we've lost most of them. As an ecosystem, they've been hit harder than almost any other type of ecosystem. Most of the grasslands in the Great Plains have been converted to farms. Out here we have a very significant treasure because we have managed to save this large desert grassland on Otero Mesa. And you know, as grasslands have disappeared, so too have the wildlife that depend on grasslands, species like pronghorn and prairie dogs and a whole host of grassland birds. That's why we need to save a place like this.
On our journey in the Otero Mesa, we saw many examples of wildlife, including this third herd of pronghorn in this amazing desert grassland. The animals and plants of Otero Mesa have little company. Dirt roads mean relatively few people are here at any one time. And oil and gas development has been minimal. But Kevin Bixby showed us what can happen when drilling is allowed.
Well, this is one of the HACO wells that have been drilled out on Otero Mesa. They've drilled 2 so far, and they have the green light to drill a 3rd. So for each of these wells, a 5-acre well pad is is constructed, and that basically it means scraping off all the vegetation and piling up the topsoil in the corner of the well pad.
There have been efforts to save this mostly public land from additional development. Former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson even asked the Obama administration to create an Otero Mesa National Monument, but that didn't happen. In addition to providing a rare habitat for animals and plants, the New Mexico Wilderness Alliance says thousands of ancient petroglyphs and archaeological sites can be found here. An impressive sight for Alex Hebert.
It's the largest panels I've seen before. I've been to South America, Central America, and all over the United States doing archaeology, and I've never seen panels like this before. And they're intricate drawings. They're confusing. I don't know what they are, but they're fascinating, and they're everywhere. You walk a step and you find a new one.
Haneen Omari was also impressed. A student with Hebert at New Mexico State University, Omari studies microorganisms found in Otero Mesa. But she also marvels at the petroglyphs providing clues of ancient civilizations.
I think it's awesome. I mean, I've honestly never seen petroglyphs to this scale. Usually you'll see like something on the side of a big mountain. It's just like a little drawing. But yeah, here they're amazing. Like, it looks like a map, honestly, like Alex said that earlier. But I think it just shows that humans do have a history with utilizing the land, but I think the difference between now and the past, the way that they utilized the land, they lived more simple, but it was also like they weren't trying to destroy the land to extract goods from it. They were just utilizing it as a tool instead of a means to an end kind of thing.
While scientists study the remnants of past civilizations, there's also a focus on modern times and a modern way of life that often neglects natural treasures. So what could convince people to appreciate places like Otero Mesa? Alex Hebert has an idea. More people should experience it.
People just don't have a lot of experience going outside. I think if people get the experience of going outside and seeing what's different about this place, they'll be excited about it, and just realizing what's at risk. And it's not just this habitat that's at risk. It's a network, and we're all connected. And when things here are destroyed, it affects everybody. And it's a cultural treasure. And if this gets destroyed, it's gone forever. And we might have photographs, but it's lost.
Losing Otero Mesa to oil and gas drilling is unthinkable to Kevin Bixby. He says the fight will continue.
We believe this is the largest desert grassland remaining in North America. There's about 500,000 acres of grassland out here. And most people don't realize that much of southern New Mexico was originally grassland. And after the Civil War, we had large herds of livestock introduced into the area, massive overstocking of the range. That, in combination with drought, led to most of those grasslands disappearing and becoming, through a process of desertification, becoming scrubland dominated by shrubs like mesquite and creosote.
Besides wildlife, Otero Mesa also holds what could be a priceless treasure as drought continues to threaten southern New Mexico and all of the Southwest. The New Mexico Wilderness Alliance says this land sits on top of the Salt Basin Aquifer. The Alliance says it could be the largest untapped freshwater aquifer left in the state of New Mexico. Above ground and below, advocates say the Otero Mesa deserves permanent protection. Visiting the Otero Mesa highlights just one example of why many experts say it's critical to reduce the use of fossil fuels. And oil and gas exploration aren't the only threats in our region. A recent gas pipeline break outside of Las Cruces forced evacuations and caused significant damage to the soil. And worldwide, scientists warn carbon emissions are warming the planet. In depth, here's Michael Hernandez.
Climate change isn't some distant phenomenon humans can afford to worry about later. It's happening now, and its effects, especially in the Southwest, can be felt every day. Regionally, climate scientists say increasing temperatures in New Mexico and throughout the Southwest decrease the amount of snow runoff that flows into river basins like the Rio Grande, affecting the area's water supply. NMSU Plant and Environmental Sciences professor and state climatologist Dr. Dave Dubois says less snow at higher elevations has serious implications for managing water resources.
At least in southern New Mexico, we rely on the surface water coming from Colorado coming down, and we like it to melt at a certain time and then fill our reservoirs from all the way from Colorado all the way down to Elephant Butte and Caballo. And climate change is actually changing the way that happens, and it's actually less water coming down. So it's not only the timing, but also the amount of water is decreasing.
University of Arizona Associate Professor Dr. Greg Garfin studies climate, natural resources, and policy, and recently visited New Mexico State University to speak at a climate change seminar series. Garfin says along with reduced snowpack, climate change decreases soil moisture and increases the number of wildfires.
So one of the things we've seen throughout the Southwest and in New Mexico as well is because we have a longer snow-free season and because we have higher temperatures, we have experienced a longer fire season, fuels dry out more, and all it takes is an ignition. We can have some very devastating fires. So we've seen much larger fires in the last decade or so than we've seen previously in history.
A federal study states the number of large forest fires in the western U.S. and Alaska has increased since the early 1980s and is projected to rise even more with climate change. Garfin says burning fossil fuels releases heat-trapping gases into the atmosphere. Meanwhile, deforestation reduces the Earth's ability to remove those gases, creating a greenhouse effect. As a result, Garfin says higher temperatures worsen drought and threaten surface water sources like rivers and lakes.
The evidence is that surface water is going to be less reliable in the future. It's not like all the surface water is going to go away, but as I said, it'll be less reliable. There'll be lower flows, longer droughts, or more severe droughts.
Data from the 4th National Climate Assessment shows global average annual temperatures have increased 1 degree Celsius from 1901 to 2016. In the United States, temperatures are projected to rise about 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2050 and past 2 degrees Celsius, the limit before climate change becomes dangerous, by the end of the century. According to the study, heat waves have become more frequent in the United States since the 1960s, while extreme cold temperatures and cold waves are less frequent. Garfin says while there's natural variations in climate, increasing temperatures are drying the Southwest. Naturally, climate change affects more than humans. Dr. Gary Romer is a professor in NMSU's Fish, Wildlife, and Conservation Ecology Department. Romer says drought and increased land surface temperatures due to climate change have impacted his studies on rodents like prairie dogs and banner-tailed kangaroo rats. Romer says the effect of climate change on wildlife is a good predictor of what's to come for people.
If we impact our biosphere to the point where it's having a more difficult time, if you want to look at it this way, of supporting wildlife populations, well then we're going to have a more difficult time supporting ourselves as we continue to degrade the biosphere.
Romer says New Mexico's ability to sustain agriculture is also something to take into account.
And so with that, we're going to have a harder and harder time, watering our crops and keeping up with, production as we have in the past. So we have to come up with strategies to deal with the potential for these types of long-term droughts and extreme temperatures.
Garfin says there are many ways people can reduce their carbon footprints now, like installing renewable energy sources in their homes and switching to cleaner modes of transportation. Dubois says it's not too late for people to take action to reduce their environmental impact.
The damage has already been done, but it could get worse. And we don't want that to happen. We want to keep it at a certain level, and then we can deal with it.
Experts agree if climate change isn't dealt with now, there won't be a later opportunity. For KRWG, I'm Michael Hernandez.
Park Williams studies climate, in particular the causes of drought and the effects of climate change on forests. He travels all over, from the western United States all the way to Ethiopia, and drills into trees to discover their past. Using tree rings and other data, he can see how the climate changed over time and how the trees responded. His work helped show a strong connection between the warming climate and the increase in wildfires in the West. I'm very pleased to welcome to Issues and Answers Park Williams of Columbia University. Park, it's so good to have you.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Thank you for being here. Let's start talking about your research and how you established this very important information, this connection between climate change and more wildfires.
Sure. In the United States, we're lucky to have really, really good data on climate over the last century and on fire over the last 40 to 50 years. And so while fire is a pretty chaotic process on any given day, for example, you can have a small fire become a very large fire for any number of reasons. When we compare fire data from year to year to climate data from year to year, we see very clearly exactly what you'd expect, and that is that in forests in the western United States, the drier years are the years with more fire, and that relationship is actually extremely strong. So if we know what the climate was in any given year, we know how much fire there should have been or how much fire there would have been in any given year. And when we drill into the data even further, we find that of all the different drought-related variables, temperature is the one that's the most important. The hot years are the big fire years. And we can see that over the last 50 years or so, as climate in the western US has increased by over 2 degrees Fahrenheit, as temperature has increased by over 2 degrees Fahrenheit, that wildfire area in forests has increased at the exact predicted rate based on the relationship between temperature and fire.
And we're talking about a big area here. I mean, I was stunned to learn that your research shows about half of the wildfires that we've seen in recent years in the West can be attributed to climate change. We're talking about an area burned the size of Massachusetts and New Hampshire combined, right?
Yes. So since the early 1980s, when our data on wildfire area becomes very precise from satellite records, we see that the area of forest burned in any given year has increased by over 1,000%, meaning there's more than 10 times more forest fire area today than there was 30 or 40 years ago. And if we use the relationship between climate and fire, to predict how much fire there would be in a given year based on climate, we can then estimate how much fire there should have been if the warming trend over the last century had never occurred. And what we find is there, of course, still would have been fire, but there only would have been about half as much forest fire area over the last 40 to 50 years, or 30 to 40 years, than we actually saw.
One of the great pieces of information I learned from looking at your faculty websites. Another piece of information was a link to a video from Columbia University, and in that video, you say that the impact of your research really comes down to policy. What are we going to do about climate change now that we know this information through your research, the research of others? What should we do?
I think we can think about our response to climate change in two ways. And so there are two very, very critical things. One, of course, is proactivity. And that means we actually have been given quite a privilege by our knowledge to understand the relationship between our emissions of greenhouse gases and climate. And given that, we know more or less how climate is going to go over the next century. We at least have a pretty good idea of how much it's going to warm over the next century. And if we don't want that, we actually have time to do stuff about it. And so for one, reducing emissions of greenhouse gases, And two, perhaps some geoengineering techniques where we take more proactive measures to reduce the temperature of the Earth, maybe by increasing the reflectivity of the atmosphere, which is a pretty dangerous idea right now, but something that's on the table. So who's going to do it? Is there going to be some decree that comes from nowhere to tell the entire globe that everybody needs to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? No. Is everybody just going to do it because it feels like the right thing to do? No. It's going to be a response to a global economy. And here, the United States actually holds a pretty big axe. The United States is one of the global leaders economically. And when we decide to make a change in policy, then the rest of the world responds. And so when we hear politicians say, well, it's actually not worth it for the United States to do anything about greenhouse gas emissions because that would only reduce the global temperature by 0.2 degrees Celsius, which is hardly anything. My response is, that's not necessarily true. If the United States decides to begin valuing solar technology and wind energy technology more, then that's going to affect the global economy in a way that makes those things more valuable. And other countries will follow in a way that they wouldn't have otherwise. So that's on the proactive side. The reactive side is also very important. No matter what we do, the globe is going to continue warming for the next century and beyond. Even if we stop burning fossil fuels today, the globe will continue warming for several more centuries. And so that means that climate is certain to change. And so beyond thinking about how to slow the warming, we need to be thinking about how we're going to adapt. And of course, there are many different ways to adapt, but we need to recognize that the warming that we've seen over the last century is only going to continue and accelerate in the future.
Very important to know. And we've talked about one of the effects, fire. I want to talk about another one that a lot of people watching this show right now want me to ask this question, and I would have asked it anyway. But let's talk about water. How will climate change impact the already stressed water supplies, not just here, but all over the Southwest? And how is this already impacting us?
Climate models suggest that as the globe warms, then the dry subtropics, the dry areas of, say, Mexico here in North America, are to migrate north. And there are two reasons why the Southwest is expected to become drier, and indeed it has already become drier. One reason is because of reduced precipitation during the fall and especially during the spring. And two is because of increased temperatures. Just like in our houses, how if we leave wet laundry out, the laundry will dry out more if we have the heater on. The globe dries stuff out. The atmosphere can dry out plants and litter on the ground faster in a warm year than in a cool year.
Yeah. And evaporation. We've seen that with our reservoir, Elephant Butte, where it has gone down to as low as about 3% of capacity.
Right. And so globally, the human-caused climate change process is not going to dry out all of the continents the same. Some places will in fact get wetter because the atmosphere holds more water in a warmer world, and that means more precipitation in some places. But the Southwest is one of the only places on the globe where we have a really high degree of confidence that it's going to dry out. And it's going to dry out because of the lack of precipitation, and also because of increased temperatures, which drive an increased evaporative demand from the atmosphere.
So we have to prepare for this. Most people don't realize that agriculture uses most of the water in many places in the Southwest, including right here. We're told 85 to 90% of the water in this area used by agriculture. And yet, we see very high water use crops like pecan trees growing in popularity, not planting fewer of them, but growing in popularity because they're high value on the market. What do you make of this?
What we decide to grow for agriculture is pretty detached from the reality of long-term water supply. So in the western United States, there are a couple sources of water. There's the water that falls out of the sky every year, and then there's the water that we can mine from the ground. And during droughts, we have been lucky to be able to use water that's in the ground in order to not suffer because of droughts. But if we look at long-term records of how much water is in the ground, we can measure this simply by looking to see how deep people need to dig wells in order to tap into the aquifer. We can see that in the southwestern U.S. and across a lot of the United States, ground water levels have been going down. And even so, here in southern New Mexico, we had really bad drought conditions from 2011 through 2014, and so there was a big drop in groundwater. Since then, the climate has actually been wetter, but groundwater levels haven't really recovered. And the reason is because we're using more groundwater than ever. And the reason for that largely is because of agricultural usage. And so if during a drought and after a drought we decide that growing more water-intensive crops is smarter than growing less water-intensive or more water efficient crops, then that means that we're making our decisions not based on the amount of water, but instead based on the price of water. And if we continue to drive water levels down in the ground by growing very water inefficient crops, that probably means that water is too cheap. It's too easy to access, and in accessing it in an unsustainable rate, we're just stealing from the future. And so the farmer that decides to grow the high value crop must be doing that because they've decided that rather than pass the farm on from generation to generation in the future with a sustainable water table, they decide, well, the water table is going down anyway because everybody's over extracting, so I'm just going to get in now and pass down the money from the pecans rather than the farm itself.
Okay. Very important information, and hopefully some elected officials are listening right now. Before fires, or rather besides fires and the lack of water, damaging our forests, there's another issue here. It makes it harder to fight climate change. I know that you say in the U.S. alone, about 20% of our annual carbon emissions are offset by tree growth in the forests, right?
So globally, we see that plants on continents gobble up about 25% of our global carbon dioxide emissions. And the oceans take up another 25%. And those two reservoirs do us a huge favor because they cut in half the amount of carbon dioxide that is going into the atmosphere every year. And as we go into the future, an important uncertainty in how climate is going to change is whether or not continents are going to continue doing us this favor of gobbling up carbon dioxide through photosynthesis. If continents become more productive, meaning more forests photosynthesizing faster, then that does us the favor of causing carbon dioxide to accumulate in the atmosphere more slowly. But if instead we have massive die-offs of forests and conversion of large carbon-rich forests into more sparsely vegetated landscapes like shrublands and grass that we see throughout the Southwest, then we go in the opposite way of the global warming problem actually getting exacerbated by a loss of carbon from the land surface.
I wanted to bring that up because I don't know that it's a widely understood phenomenon, and when people hear about conservation and hear about the importance of maintaining our forest, this is a really concrete way to explain this that's very important to understand. Along these lines, this is a really interesting time when we talk about climate change politics. On one hand, you see states like New Mexico taking bold action, passing legislation just this year to have carbon-free electric generation in the next few decades. They vastly sped up the process through legislation to do that. But on the other hand, at the federal level, you see a simple resolution, not even legislation to do anything specifically or money placed on anything, but the Green New Deal. It was a resolution saying, hey, we have a problem. Here are some things that we might look at with legislation in the future. And it caused this enormous political storm. It was used as a political weapon, actually, against any Democrat who might want to even think about supporting the Green New Deal. Well, what do you make of this?
The decisions made in Washington, I think, are made in a reactive way, where I guess I see politicians as rather than being real people with real opinions, they're reacting and playing a game, and taking the path of least resistance toward a position that they want.
They're certainly not reading your papers, probably.
No, they're definitely not reading papers. And so I guess where I'm going with that is that the way that you affect this personality-less creature that is the political environment in Washington is by changing the opinion of regular Americans. And in terms of climate change, it just means having them educated. And so being able to talk to people. And right now, climate change is not a top 5 issue among the United States public, and it probably never will be. But if we have a public that all agrees that it is that, or say 90% of the public understands that when you put more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the globe warms, and as a result, the environment is going to change, and the distribution of water is going to change, and the distribution of forests will change. If you have a public that just accepts this as reality, then it doesn't need to be a top 5 issue. It's kind of like gravity. Politicians don't need to debate the existence of gravity. It's just something we accept. Yeah,
so let's get to that. About changing minds. A recent Gallup poll, I thought this was very interesting, found about 66% of Americans believe global warming is caused by human activity. So that is near an all-time high, 66%. But that still means about 1/3 of Americans don't believe established science.
Right. And that's, but we're trending in the right direction.
We are.
It is very interesting. There are two points here that I find interesting. One is a lot of the people who don't think that climate change is human caused actually live in a part of the country where warming hasn't been all that severe. So the southeastern United States and Midwest both have not warmed all that much. And the reasons for that we're still trying to sort out. But if you look at the globe, it actually stands out like a sore thumb that this is one of the only parts of the globe that hasn't really warmed. And so people are responding, people are smart, and they're responding to their own life experience, and when it begins warming faster in those areas, they'll be quicker to accept.
And another positive thing, you talked about, and we should be positive because it is near an all-time high, 66% who believe in established science on this. There's also another reason for hope. I mean, here in Las Cruces and all over the world, we have seen marches for science, that people go out and beyond climate change, there are other issues, go out and it reflects the concerns that many Americans have about these issues and about protecting science from politics. Trying to do that.
Right. Yeah.
And this is important. I mean, I don't know that everyone realizes the funding, a lot of the funding for the work that you do and many other scientists do comes from the federal government.
Right. And the relationship between science and politics is really complicated. One, because we scientists do work that is not valued by a lot of people on a day-to-day basis, meaning that the public isn't seeing reason to fund science directly. And so this is the reason we have governments, is in order to fund things that are best for the greater good over the long term, even if people don't see the value today.
And you make the point, we need more drought research. We need to do more of it.
Sure. Well, so science has settled that the globe warms when you put more CO2 in the atmosphere. This isn't the first time this has happened on geologic timescales. When more CO2 goes in the atmosphere, the globe warms. One of the most exciting and interesting and important realms of human-caused climate change is what's going to happen to water. Some places are going to get wetter, some places are going to get drier. Hardly anywhere is going to stay the same. But if you travel across any continent, you'll see that the predominant reason why the scenery changes from place to place is water availability. What can grow where, what can live where is dependent on water. And so as the distribution of water changes across the planet, life changes as a result. and that those changes don't stop at just forests and animals, they'll affect humans specifically. And so we need to know more about how climate change affects water availability.
Okay, Park Williams, he is from Columbia University. Park, thank you so much for sharing some of your work here today and important information about drought, fire, and climate change.
Thank you.
Students may learn about climate change and other pressing issues in the classroom, but some experts say there's another critical way to ensure young people appreciate the need for conservation, getting them outside. In Depth, Anthony Moreno introduces us to a local nonprofit that provides opportunities for Hispanic youth to experience the great outdoors.
Be very, very careful with those hooks. So those are
It's a weekend morning at Leesburg Dam State Park, and Gabe Vasquez is giving fishing safety tips along the bank of the Rio Grande to students from Las Cruces High School. Vasquez, founder of the Nuestra Tierra Conservation Project, launched with support by the New Mexico Wildlife Federation and partners, aims to connect middle school to college-age students to the outdoors while educating them on the history and culture of the region.
Number one, I wanted to work with youth in our community to show them the outdoors, to have them have the experiences that a lot of kids that are underprivileged don't get to have, but also to teach them about places like this, the Rio Bravo, the history and the culture, so that they can take care of these places when they grow up as well. Release it once you're ready to go. There you go. Perfect.
Nuestra Tierra provided this group of students from Las Cruces High School fishing licenses and supplies so they could participate.
You know, we all know that some of the poorest communities we have in New Mexico are Hispanic, are Latino communities, and so poverty and transportation are a big barrier to them getting out here and enjoying our public lands, enjoying experiences on the river. So we try to break down those barriers through this program, and it is really important because they are in our backyard, and not only are they in our backyard, but they belong to our ancestors and our grandfathers and our parents, and that's why this program is called the Nuestra Tierra Conservation Project, because these youth should take ownership of these public lands. They belong to them just as much as the guy visiting from Washington State or anywhere else. And so I'm very proud that we're getting them out here.
It's an experience that student Jose Jaime will remember. This is his first time fishing.
So far, it's fun. I'm happy to do it for the first time and actually experience something.
Star Maestas, another student in the group, says she likes to fish and explore the outdoors with her family.
Release a little bit of
she
line,
says being outdoors has some benefits.
Right, it's very important. It's very therapeutic for them, and it's very, it's fun. It's just really nice and pretty out here. So everybody should go out more often.
Not only did the group fish, but they also took part in a ranger-led hike around the area where they learned more about the history and culture of the region.
You know, I'd like to think that we're helping to create the next generation of conservation stewards, because we're not just teaching and we're not just having fun, but we're encouraging some of these youth to have careers working outdoors.
Vasquez says it was one experience while he was a child that led him to this work. While living in Ciudad Juarez as a youth, Vasquez says his father one day decided to take a trip to New Mexico to explore the outdoors.
My dad said to me and my brother, "Vamos a pescar, you know, let's go fishing." And I think my brother kind of laughed at the time because he said, you know, where are we going to go fishing? You know, we lived in a very highly industrialized place in Ciudad Juarez next to the maquiladoras. And he said, no, there's a place not far from here in Nuevo Mexico where we can go and we can get you guys in the water. And we can get you fishing on the Rio Grande.
Vasquez says they decided to also make it a camping trip up to Caballo Lake, just south of Truth or Consequences.
We were fishing for maybe about 20 minutes before Border Patrol was called.
Vasquez says that the Border Patrol detained his father and took him to a station in Truth or Consequences.
We didn't have fishing licenses. We didn't know that we needed fishing licenses. This being our first time and us coming from Juarez and not understanding how the system works, they took my dad in. Border Patrol took my dad in and they took him to Truth or Consequences.
He said the agents told them that they had to verify his father's identity, which he said took around 3 to 4 hours, Once that was complete, they released his dad with a citation for fishing without a permit.
Devastated, I thought we were headed back to Juarez, and my dad could have very easily said, fishing is not for us, the outdoors is not for us, this is for other people. But instead he said, we're going back to that campsite, we're going to get our fishing licenses, and we're gonna fish. And that night we caught 5 or 6 catfish with our little Superman rods and a pack of hot dogs. And it was one of the happiest moments in my life.
It was at that moment that Vasquez says it made him think about who belongs not only in the outdoors, but other spaces in society.
It's something that's impacted me, and when I think about these kids that are enjoying this maybe for the first time, I want them to feel like they belong too, because they truly do.
Educating youth that public lands are a place where everyone is equal is what Vasquez says he hopes to continue to do so this generation can take ownership and pass it on to the next one. For KRWG, I'm Anthony Moreno.
As we conclude our program today, I'm so pleased to have in studio with us for the rest of our hour, Gabe Vasquez, Las Cruces City Councilor, and as you heard in that report, the founder of Nuestra Tierra Conservation Project. Gabe, it is great to have you with us.
Thank you, Fred. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
So to start off with, tell me how this project came together, how you got the idea for this and founded this great opportunity for young people to get out and learn about nature and appreciate the incredible place where we live.
Well, Fred, it was really born out of a simple idea that every kid deserves to be outside and to enjoy the outdoors. I was privileged in that my dad took me and my brother at a very early age fishing right here in the Rio Grande. In fact, Caballo Lake, Elephant Butte, and fishing the bridge in Hatch were my first experiences really out in the wild. And so it enriched my life tremendously. And I want to make sure every other kid has a chance to do that here in New Mexico, at least that we start to break down the barriers for kids to access the outdoors. Some more background behind that is I was working for Senator Martin Heinrich on his staff during the enactment of Organ Mountain's Desert Peaks National Monument, and got to experience a lot of special places I hadn't been to in our mountain ranges here around Las Cruces, and thought, man, why don't more Las Crucens come out here? Why doesn't everybody know about these tremendous resources that exist out here? And in particular, I think our youth should experience these places, because I think that they'll have a better understanding and a greater sense of ownership and conservation kind of thinking about our mountains and our deserts and our rivers and how important all those things are. So those two things, along with working on child welfare policy, coming together to say perhaps we should build a program here that really focuses on bringing the kids to the land. And so that's where the Nuestra Tierra Conservation Project came out of. And Nuestra Tierra means our land. And so that sense of ownership, I think, is important to develop a care for these places, a kind of a conservation ethos.
Yeah.
Yes.
In Anthony's report, I mean, we really get a sense of just how important this was to you as a young man growing up. Did you ever think that you'd one day have the chance to affect public policy on this and found a nonprofit?
You know, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And actually, I didn't think about a career working in conservation or even in the outdoors later in my career. You know, I had a journalism degree here from New Mexico State University, and didn't think about environment or conservation as being a career opportunity for myself even at that time. So hopefully this project, this opportunity for more kids to go outside, and now through the Outdoor Equity Fund, helps to spark that in other young New Mexicans, that they can be everything from forest rangers to game and fish officers to soil scientists to soil. I mean, there's the possibilities are endless. If you like being outside, there's a career out there for you.
So let's talk about the Outdoor Equity Fund. Some of our viewers might be familiar with that the state legislature this year, thanks to your advocacy and the work of others, passed this legislation for a fund to help allow more young New Mexicans get experiences like this, get outside, understand more about nature, appreciate nature. Tell us how this is going to work, what it's all about.
Okay, so
Fred, you know, this was part of a larger package that also included the creation of the Division of Outdoor Recreation within the state's Economic Development Department. And so prior to this bill being drafted for the Outdoor Equity Fund, the governor, at that time campaigning for governor, Lujan Grisham, had said she would support the creation of an Office of Outdoor Recreation. So I got together with Representative Angelica Rubio from District 35 here in Las Cruces.
Who rode her bike to Santa Fe.
Who rode her bike to Santa Fe.
Live in conservation.
Tremendous feat, something I don't think I could honestly do. But we got together and we said, how do we build equity into this new Office of Outdoor Recreation? Because what we thought about was, it's great to use this as an economic development tool for the state, especially as we attract tourists that perhaps will be coming from other states to be able to stay in our hotels and to go to our restaurants and all those things associated with visiting New Mexico because of outdoor recreation opportunities. But how do we simultaneously give back to our communities in New Mexico, and in particular to young people, so that while we're increasing our economy, something's being put aside for them to be able to enjoy these same things, so that they can ski at Ski Apache, or so that they can go fishing in the Rio Chama, and those kind of activities that we'll be marketing to tourists now more aggressively. So the Outdoor Equity Fund is a state-sponsored, state-administered fund that lives within the Economic Development Department and actually administered by the Youth Conservation Corps. It creates a pot of money, so public-private funding can go into it. So each year legislators can appropriate money, their junior capital outlay money, to the Outdoor Equity Fund, in addition to more appropriations hopefully coming soon as investments into our youth, but also outdoor recreation companies like REI or Patagonia or the North Face. These companies that will also see a windfall from the economic development opportunities we're creating here. People will be buying outdoor gear, and these companies will benefit. So we wanted to give them an opportunity to give back to New Mexico as they make money from New Mexico. And that Outdoor Equity Fund would then, on a competitive basis, be used to serve nonprofits, local governments, Native American communities who have existing or want to have new outdoor recreation and education programs. And so the fund can be used for just about anything, from buying tents, backpacks, sleeping bags, to paying for a professional guide, for example, to maybe do a river rafting trip, to also hiring being able to pay for the staff to be able to take youth out. So it's a very flexible fund that's really meant for one goal, and that's to serve underserved and underprivileged communities, 0 to 18, and be able to get those kids outside.
So important, and I think many of us can relate to this idea that when we were younger, we had someone who gave us an opportunity, and that had an influence on our adult lives that we could never have anticipated. I'm sure this will have that impact as well. As I mentioned at the beginning of the show, you're also a Las Cruces city councilor. Many of our viewers know you in that capacity.
I think that's the last time I was here. You were interviewing me for that.
That's right. That's right. And you were elected. But I wanted to mention that today in relation to this, because Las Cruces has been working on these issues as well as a city. City public policy is very focused on protecting our environment, and one way the city does this is by adding more renewable energy. Your thoughts on this?
Yes, Fred. So I think as cities, incorporated governments across the state, we have to complement what the state is doing. And actually, I'd like to say that we probably came before the state in setting some very aggressive renewable energy standards, at least to power city facilities. And so working with Councilor Gil Sorg, with the support of the rest of the council and the mayor, we have set some renewable energy standards of where we want our power to come from, to be able to start going away from those fossil fuels and carbon generated sources of energy, and really do our part, in addition to what the state has now done with the Energy Transition Act, to be able to say that you can do this, that it is affordable, and hopefully that also spurs industry, that spurs homeowners, that helps the local small business economy. So it's not just about clean energy, but it's about building a new economy. And when local governments, with the spending power that they have, get behind this effort, We help the environment, we help small business, and we help lawmakers also at the state level have the confidence to make the decisions to set aggressive renewable energy standards. So I'm proud of the city and what they're doing for that.
And of course, that was the big news this year, renewable energy standards. New Mexico emerged as a national leader in renewable energy, finally taking advantage of the fact that we have more sun and more wind than just about anywhere in the country. And the legislation will require that electric generation be carbon-free in New Mexico in the next couple of decades. We'll take a couple of decades to get there. How important do you think this statement is by the state of New Mexico in a time when at the federal level just the opposite is happening, that even our Environmental Protection Agency, the agency that's tasked to protect our environment, is under attack at the federal level?
Well, it's really important, Fred. I think it's a statement of our values as a state, but it's also smart. I think it's really smart. To me, I see it as finally perhaps our state government being in line with an economic development opportunity that has always been there, but that we've never fully taken advantage of. Part of the reason why is because I think our reliance on fossil fuels and fossil fuel production, what it means to families and our local economy, has been so strong, and to our state budget and to the institutions that benefit from oil and gas production has been so strong that the hesitancy to get away from that, or at least to start diversifying the energy portfolio of the state, has been politically quite a huge challenge to get over. And so it's really important because as a state we're saying that we value this industry both for the climate impacts, the environmental impacts that it will help to mitigate, but also that we believe that there's an industry there that will help power those jobs, that will help build those small businesses, that will help power those local economies. And so it is, to me, historic in that sense. And the sun and the wind are resources that will continue to be there until the sun burns out, potentially. And so,
then we have much bigger problems.
And then we may have to find another planet. But that's the natural course of things. It's not human caused, right? And so, so I think it's incredibly important because it really allows us to set up the framework in a certainty within the business community to say, as long as these policies are in place, we can have the confidence to invest in solar and in wind. And again, we know that these resources have always been there. They're not going away. So we're capitalizing, Fred, on an asset that is natural to New Mexico and that gives us an advantage that a lot of other states don't have. So it's really smart and it's really important to our climate.
Okay, so some very important things happening at the state and federal level and through nonprofits like the one that you founded.
Yes.
What else could be done at the local and state levels to encourage conservation? Because as we know, local government, state government is where it's happening. At the federal level, the gridlock in Congress, things are simply not happening. So local communities, states have to lead the way.
Well, we have to continue to explore new ways to make our communities resilient. And that comes in a lot of different ways when we talk about climate and the environment. I think top of the list has to be water conservation. We have to sit down and really seriously look at what water resources we have in the state, look at options for diversifying industries that are heavily reliant on water. We have to look at agriculture. We have to look at the way that water consumption is really the culture of water consumption in New Mexico, and be able to make often some tough decisions. As you know, the U.S. versus or Texas versus New Mexico water case, a federal water case, is undergoing right now, which will actually have a serious impact depending on the outcome of that case on the water resources here in southern New Mexico and in our community. So we have to be mindful of the way we plan communities. We have to be mindful of our water use in the future and anticipating water use in the future. And locally, water conservation measures and investments. The city of Las Cruces, for example, has started to install smart meters so that we can more accurately detect leaks in people's water systems, both for commercial and residential use, which allows us then to put a stop to some of those leaks.
That was a popular story on our website.
Oh,
picture of you finding a leak in your irrigation system.
You know, I talk about this stuff and I didn't expect it to happen to me, but sure enough, my sprinklers, aging sprinkler system, perhaps over the winter leaked because it was frozen or something like that. So smart meter technology really helps to water conservation, but then thinking even more about requirements for future subdivisions, for example, of what type of water infrastructure you're going to have, what kind of water conservation measures you're going to build into master plans and that kind of thing. And we have to be courageous to do that, because oftentimes there's opposition to those things because it's cheaper sometimes to do it a different way or to do it the traditional way. So we do that, and you know, in the larger picture of having New Mexicans better understand watersheds and impacts of climate change on forest fires, resiliency of deserts and mountains, it starts with getting people out there. And I think at the very core of caring for something is experiencing it. And so if you can get somebody out to the watershed of the Rio Grande in southern Colorado, perhaps they see the Rio Grande in a different way because they understand the source and they understand the impact. So little things like that in terms of getting people more acclimated with the way that our natural world works, so that when we start to make tweaks to things on the policy end, people are more accepting of that kind of thing. So, you know, it's a combination of policy, experiential knowledge, and courage, I think, to really get us over that hump. And also building the economic opportunities for people, because we can't replace all of the sources that we have for energy or for water without thinking about how it's going to impact our communities.
And it's great having the young people out there starting early, thanks to your work and the work of others. Gabe
Thank you, Fred.
Vasquez. Gabe, thank you so much for being
Thank you,
with
Fred.
us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you at home as well. That's Issues and Answers, Protecting Our Environment. I'm Fred Martino. For all of us at KRWG News, have a great week. Nature American Spring Live on KRWG Public Media, April 29th, 30th, and May 1st at 7 p.m. More at pbs.org/American Spring Live. Major support for Nature American Spring Live and this related local programming was provided by the National Science Foundation and the Anne Ray Foundation.